Hey everyone, and hopefully you're having a lovely morning or evening or afternoon whenever you're listening to this. And it's a topic we haven't covered for a little while on the show. In fact, we've been going for over 5 years, and we've really only spoken about this area once. I think way back in 2021 or something. I can't even remember. So I'm really stoked today to be joined by Aymeric from a company that name I just love. I'm so stoked to be interviewing him for everything we're going to talk about. But if I could come up with a cool name for a company, this would be it. And I'm going to let Aymeric say the name because it's so awesome. But by way of introduction, Aymeric, I want to understand a little bit more about your background first and how you came to be working on the problem that you and your company are solving, and then we can go in from there.
Sure, sure. So great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, Vincent. And my name is Aymeric. I'm the founder of Lord of the Trees. Started the business in Australia 7 years ago. The What I was trying to solve at the time, we're still doing it, but the real light bulb moment was I'm actually going to tell you the story, like how it came. How this project came alive. But I was randomly watching a documentary by David Attenborough about the Galapagos Island, and he was talking about. So in the background, imagine on the screen you have David, and in the background this really lush tropical rainforest, and he's actually in the Galapagos Island, and he explains how the lava came out of the ocean. At the beginning, there was just nothing, and little by little, over hundreds of thousands of years, seeds starting to colonize this rock. And over time, it grew to what it is now. So at first, you had the big seeds that would float from the west coast of Americas, such as coconuts that would float following cold currents. They would end up on the shore and germinate. Then you had the seeds that were light enough to fly, like dandelion seeds. And the last one were the one dropped by birds. And when you say that on the screen, is a picture of a seagull doing a poop. And that was my aha moment. I was like, wow, why don't we replace birds with drones and make our own seed pods? So I knew at the time I just finished my Masters of Environmental Management from UNSW in Sydney, and I knew we had a big problem, a big issue to deal with in terms of reforestation and deforestation globally. Um, so that was it. That was the beginning of Lord of the Trees. It just made sense at the time. Yeah.
So, if I can encapsulate it slightly, and I'm sorry to take the spin on it, Lord of the Trees, inspired by bird poo.
Correct. Absolutely. 100%.
Amazing. I love it. I love it. Okay, good. Well, it perfectly sets us up. We've got the company name in there a couple of times, which is also wonderful because I can't get over it. We use that word Lord a lot in my circle of friends. So I've got a bunch of friends I've sent. I'm like, I'm interviewing this company. It's going to be amazing. I want to start with deforestation, and I want to use Australia as a starting point. But I'm also keen to understand it in the context of an emerging economy or a developing economy. I'm not sure what the right word is to use. I want to understand where we're at today in terms of land use and degradation related to land use, both in an Australian context and some other emerging economy context, if that's all right as a starting point.
Yeah, yeah. So it just depends how far you want to go. But if we um, look at Australia first, and we go back hundreds of thousands of years, the entire continent was covered with the dense rainforest. And over the years, the dentary recessed, and it is the remnant of it is today what we have in Queensland. So yeah, the dentary is the oldest rainforest in the world. It's older than the Amazon in South America. In terms of land use, it's a bit different here in Australia. There's a lot of obviously mining operations. We had to cut trees as well to make room for livestock and grow crops. And you do find those elements equally present to any other country in the world. at different scales, at different levels. So in Africa, for example, there's probably more deforestation linked to wanting to make room to grow crops and raise livestock. In other parts of the world, there is industrialization as well, the encroachment of cities worldwide, that are always eating on the natural ecosystem to, put more factories, create more buildings, etc., etc. So it's a bit of the same everywhere, but at different levels.
Yeah. And just going into the first point about the Dane tree, so over hundreds of thousands of years, that arc of a story, how much of that reduction in rainforest covering the entire continent to being in one specific part of Queensland is related to our impact, not even pre kind of, white settlers, like, Aboriginals have been on the land, Indigenous people have been on the land for 60,000 or thereabouts years. So how much of this is related to the whole arc of human impact and maybe comparing and contrasting, pre-white settlement versus, from there forward? Like, help me understand that a bit more.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily always peg the impact on the environment only to humans, right? The Earth um, has been evolving over millions and millions of years and going through cycles of ice ages and then heat waves and so forth. So it's always moving. It's always, we were not there to speak. We don't know what happened 200 million years ago here in Australia or anywhere else in the world. So there's a lot of we make a lot of assumptions. I don't always think humans are the number one cause responsible. Yeah, we might accelerate in good or bad, the impact that we have on the environment, but we're not the only catalyst for changes.
Yeah. And would you say that just, and I know this is a bit of a rabbit hole, and I want to get into what we're actually doing in a minute, but our obligation as a species is to minimize our impact or to try to regenerate our previous impact. But would it fall, like, do we continue beyond actually let's terraform the place to how we might want it to be? Where do you think the arc of our accountability and responsibility sits as a species?
I think it's to leave an intergenerational legacy where our kids, grandkids, and the future generation that we don't even know of would like to enjoy as much of natural capital that we are enjoying today, if not more. Yeah. So I think it's trying to find that balance between um, development, right? Um, the extractions of minerals and finding that balance as to, okay, we can't always be taking out of the soil, out of the earth. We have to replenish as well and try to, if we can, as much as we can, create a sense of balance. That's my
And
thinking.
so, in a practical sense, that means where you have the necessity of human existence, which, not just cities, but also the means to support those cities, whether it's getting resources out of the ground or having farming land. Notwithstanding that those uses may change, and we may start mining asteroids and having vertical farms, which may reduce the need for those. There is still the legacy of having done that, and the opportunity and the obligation is to bring that back to potentially what it was. And the question becomes how much of that is there and where is it and how do we approach the problem? Would that be a fair summation?
Yeah, that's a way of doing it. Yeah, that's
And then, so if you want to kind of articulate that, maybe just using the Australian context, how big is the problem slash opportunity with regards to regeneration of land?
Yeah. So just one point before I answer your question. Not all available land needs to be reforested. I just want to make this a point. People think it's always you want to plant trees everywhere, but if you look at the Great Plains of America, where you have bisons still roaming, well, bisons need this type of environment to flourish, right? So we don't want to be planting trees in those environments. So that's one point. In terms of opportunity, I'm gonna zoom out of Australia for a second and just tell you in the world at the moment there is 1.7 trillion hectares of land that needs to be reforested. So it's a big number. It's to put it in perspective, it's the equivalent of USA and China put together over
And wow,
the entire planet. So
that's a huge.
that's the opportunity. Yeah, it is huge. It's big.
And like, if I'm gonna do some back of the envelope maths, if you got 1.7 trillion hectares, I just want to make sure I got that number. If you were reforesting that, what's the density of trees? I'm trying to work out how many trees need to be planted
Yeah,
in
it
an
depends. So
ecosystem.
in the environment, you have different type of trees. You don't necessarily so a forest, right? As soon as you go over 70% of canopy closure, you have a forest. But before that, you have woods that are a bit more sparse and open, and you have plains and savanna as well that are as equally important. So it's just trying to find the balance and what is right for the environment. It's not just thinking about humans at this stage. It's about thinking as the collective. So the collective are all the birds, the animals, the mammals, the insects, and the fungi as well that sustain this ecosystem.
Always with the fungi. And so, just getting just a last little question on cause, and I think you kind of said it right up front, but in maybe in the Australian context or more broadly, your three big levers by the sound of it are cities encroaching, land use for growing crops or sustaining animals that we then eat, and mining as kind of the three big. Is there and it might be contentious putting this in the mix, but is land use for energy generation part of a challenge here as well, or is it just more the other three?
I think it's coming to a point where we are starting to see that globally. And actually, I'm glad you brought this up, but there is more and more, those data centers for AI in particular are taking a lot of space. Um, I'm not sure if you read the news about a month ago, Meta in America is planning to build an AI center which will be the size of Manhattan. So it's where are you? Two questions. One, where are you going to put that? And two, what is your access to energy to power that new data center? Like 3 weeks ago in Texas, I can't remember what city, but the town had to make a choice between powering the city or sending the energy to the AI center. They chose the latest, and the city went into a gridlock of neighborhoods that were completely offline, had no electricity for a few hours, and then they rotated that just to make sure there was just enough for the people while AI was still powering. So these are, I think, new questions and new challenges that we are our generation or this generation now is has to face. We didn't have that right 10 years ago, 15 years ago,
Yeah, four
um,
years ago.
so 4 years ago. Uh, so it's interesting. Um, there will come a point where yeah, we'll have to make those decisions as to well, are we planting trees here or are we building a data center?
Yeah, or building a solar farm around a data center. Totally get it. All right, cool. We've got a bit of a sense of the size and scale of the problem. I want to jump into a little bit about kind of how land regeneration is happening or isn't happening today. Like, let's understand what today's solutions look like and how much they're utilized and whether they're working or not, and some of the understanding and metrics around that, if we can.
Yeah. So again, it's a big subject, and I'm gonna tell you how we operate. We're not the silver bullet when it comes to that. I've been in the environment for in this industry for over 22 years, and I think again it's a collective. It's what everyone is doing together that creates a difference. With our operations, the way we operate at Lord of the Trees, there is two parts that work in symbiosis together. You have high tech. So the high tech is the drones. So we do reforestation using drones primarily, robots and AI, and we combine that with low tech. So low tech it's spelled LOTEK, which stands for local, traditional, ecological knowledge. In that regards, we work very closely with, so in Australia, the Aboriginal people, in other parts of the world, the forest people. We want to make sure we understand their landscape. We want to ensure that we are bringing back to the environment species that are important to them, whether it's food, medicine, plants that they would use for ceremonies, and also trees that they are going to harvest to create homes. Remember, those people live in the forest. And we involve them as well with seed gathering and fire burning. So, especially in Australia, where we can do that. So, we do, as part of the process to do reforestation, we work with a few different indigenous corporations that do cultural burning that they've done for thousands of years here in Australia. So we are reviving those practices. It's really exciting to see how landscapes are, especially in Australia, are very resilient when it comes to fire, and the management of fuel on the ground, whether it's branches, leaves, or any type of biomass that is that's on the ground. Managed properly with cultural burning actually helps reforestation efforts on the other side.
Interesting. And I want to dive into all of this a little bit more because there's three parts to this, as you said. But I just wanted, before we get into it, understand what's happening today. Let's say you've got BHP, not to pick on them just because I know them, uh, and they have a mine. The mine has a 30-year useful life. That mine finishes its useful life in 2024, and there's some obligation for them to fix the mess that they left, like reforest and regenerate what they've got. Now, this doesn't happen in every country, but in Australia, that's part of granting the mining tenement and lease. What are they doing today pre Lord of the Trees? Like, how are they approaching the problem, and what does that look like for them as an organisation, and then how does it turn out for us as a species who want to leave this thing better than how we found it, or or at least get it back to what it was pre mining?
Yeah. So in case of mining, you are leasing the land, right, for, as you say, 30 years, for example. Depending on your mining concession, you're leasing the land of the indigenous people, traditional owners of the land. And when your operations are finished, you're supposed to hand it back the same way you found it. Well, it's highly unlikely to happen when you extract minerals out of the ground. So what you do is you do your best to try to restore that land. So money is put into an escrow account with the federal government when the mining operation starts, and at the end, that escrow is being released to enable that ecosystem restoration. So usually, what happens? Every mine is different, every landscape is different, but um, at a very high level, usually what happens is the mine brings back some topsoil, and then seeds or are being planted, either scattered onto the new topsoil, or depending where it is, you reintroduce native grasses as well, and then your shrubs, your trees, etc.
Yeah. And so that approach today, I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, does it work? And is how it's being done a barrier to doing a lot more of it in other contexts where it's not legally mandated and the money's sitting in an account? I'm trying to understand where the friction point is with doing a lot more of it and doing it better.
Yeah, I think there is more consciousness today from the mining industry to want to do the right thing, and do this better than the way it was done. I don't know, 50 years ago. There is a misconception as well in our industry that once you plant a tree or once you put a native um, seedling in the ground, that's it, the job is done, and nature will take care of it. And a few years back in Turkey, Turkey launched the biggest reforestation effort, involved hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of people to plant. And in one day, they planted over 1 million trees, right? 1 million little seedlings in the ground. A year later, or 2 years later, 99% of those seedlings were dead.
Wow.
So
And
the
what
job
was the
actually
gap?
starts. The job actually starts. It doesn't start. It's not once you've planted or once you've scattered the seeds. It actually the job starts when when you do this. You have to take care of those little plants. So picture
Mm.
this: you're going to put in the ground a little seedling that has been watered, sheltered from the sun in a nursery over the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years, and you suddenly put it in the outback of Australia and say, "But like that." So there's a lot to consider when you do those type of restoration efforts. So
Interesting.
we use a technique called chronosequencing, which is we mimic what nature would be doing if we're not there. So the first things first, you have to repair the soil. You have to make sure the topsoil um, is is not going to blow when there is a wind, which is a big problem in Australia. It's a big problem in Africa. It's a big problem as well in America, where you have strong winds that actually remove the topsoil. So you want to make sure when you put new topsoil, you have the ground cover, and that's going to take a year, to plant those native grasses. But you just want to make sure you have this coverage. The good thing as well with native grasses is their root system is incredibly sophisticated. It goes really deep into the soil, helps raise the water table, and it helps as well when there is rain to dissipate that water. Um, into the ground. So it's very important to have the ground cover before you start thinking about planting trees and seedlings.
Mm. So I want to get into some of the sequencing of this because you've touched on a few of the parts of it. But before we do that, I want to get back to bird poo uh, in a metaphorical sense. You have this again. I love the language here, and there's probably something I want to talk a bit about the language because it's obviously very intentional. But you talk about this thing called a seed pod triumph, uh, which is fabulous language. But help me understand what that is and how that thing's put together, and then we'll put it in the context of the overall timeline of or sequencing of events, in Lord of the Trees when you're regenerating.
Yeah, yeah. So when the I'm going back to the documentary with David Attenborough, but when you had that seagull doing a dropping, he went on to explain that those seeds had the bed out of all of the other options, which was being carried by cold current or flying like a dandelion seeds. These were the seeds that had a better chance of survival because of the rich nutrient packed into bird poop, right? So if you for us to do the same, we look at anything that is, so we do a lot of soil analysis first. So we look at the nutrients that are present in the soil, what is lacking. We look at the exposure as well of that particular plant. Once that species is here, does it like altitude? Does it like a exposure to sun or more shade? Does it like humidity, or is it more a dry tolerant species? Once we have all of these, we we make our own mixture of different nutrients, and it's almost like making a seed ball, right? Where we pack, so we have the seeds that is surrounded by this rich, compact nutrient, almost like a little backpack with all kinds of good stuff. And because once it as it gets, we dry it, we load it onto one of our drones, and then once the drone goes out, it knows exactly where to drop those species. So it does seed balls that have a particular species. So it's tailored, it's specifically made for this one particular environment, right?
Mm.
Or a
Yeah,
plant within a
understood.
plant. So they don't all get the same type of nutrients. They don't all get. It's not. Yeah. It's a very intellectual way to approach the landscape, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just in terms of that specific delivery, it's a drone, and these drones are just off the shelf drones that you've kind of retrofitted in a way. Is that
No,
right? What's going on with the drones? Help me
no.
understand
So
those.
we no, we use military grade drones. It takes two people to. So they weigh 65 kilos with no payload. It takes two people when you have. There's a video of us on YouTube with um,
We'll link to it.
doing a planting, but takes two people to take out of the ute, um, and they fly really. Everyone has a different way of doing things. We decided to fly really close to the ground. So when I started the business 7 years ago, I was the fifth company globally to do drone seeding. Today, there's about a dozen, and there is a dozen different approaches to the same problem. So we do sitting really close to the ground. We don't the drones don't fly more than 3 meters above ground, and we do what we call precision planting. So we have the technology that we develop is the technology that is attached at the bottom of this drone. So we don't make drones. We create the technology that is attached to those drones. We only use the drones as a carrier, a vehicle, and the strengths of that. So we use the best drones that we can find, the ones that can carry a big payload and that fly a long time. And we put the seed pods onto the seeder, which is attached to the bottom of the drone, and the drone knows exactly where to go and when to release the seed pods. The technique is very similar to paintball. I don't know if you ever done paintball, but
Yes.
paintball it hurts. We with our delivery technique, because we use gravity, it doesn't hurt. But we don't want. We're not. The aim is not to go deep into the soil because nature doesn't do that. So if you look at nature, when trees create seeds and the seeds fly, or the seed is being eaten by a bird or a little mammal, for example, and it's being dropped somewhere, it doesn't go into the soil. The only exceptions, of course, are some ants do bury seeds. You've got the perfect example of mice and squirrels as well that bury seed for later to be used. Some of the seeds that don't get eaten actually have a chance to germinate. But other than that, in nature, seeds are just being dropped onto the floor and then will germinate eventually. Yeah, so we are doing that.
Yeah. And so just to give me a sense of the scale of this, you've got a 65 kilogram drone, two people are getting it out of the back of a truck or a ute or whatever. There's some form of catcher that you've built and designed that attaches to that drone. What number of pods is it carrying? And then like help me understand a single run of a drone and
Yeah,
how it you said it knows what to do. Is it interpreting some stuff and there's some technology that how does it know what to do?
no, no. So how does it? It's a good question. So the first time so it's a four steps approach. The very first step, the stage one, we do ecosystem um, monitoring. So we go in with a very tiny drone and we map out the landscape. We use that data on stage two. So that's when the AI comes in and takes over. We create a digital twin basically of this environment. So on the computer, it's 3D digital twin. And then we zoom out, we look at all of the species that are either currently existing in the surrounding areas of this particular landscape that we're trying to reforest or restore. Or if there is no data available, we talk to the indigenous people who live there. We're trying to understand. We have a partnership as well with a lab called Restore in Switzerland that validates our plant selection. We ensure that we get a stamp as well from depending which country we work in, usually the Department of the Environment, just to confirm that we're not reintroducing species that could be a weed in the future. We don't want that. And then comes stage three, which is the planting. So Planting is the fastest of the stages. We make the seed pods into a lab. Depending on the species, the seed will dictate how big is the seed pod. So we can have seed pods as small as 1 centimeter in diameter to 3 centimeters in diameter, right? Sometimes sometimes we only use seeds as well with no other we don't make them into seed pods. It just depends which landscape we're targeting and what we're doing. When it comes to payload, it can go anywhere between 10 to 15, 20 kilos. But keep in mind as well that the more payload you load onto the drone, the shorter time it will spend in flying. So it's trying to find the perfect balance between, okay, what's the payload versus the amount of land that we need to memorize. Um, and once we have that and we've done that, we go into stage four, and stage four is the monitoring. So when we do carbon credit forest, the project is a 30-year project.
Wow.
When
So
we
you're sorry.
Yeah, and then when we do a biodiversity project, it's a 99-year project. So we have a legacy plan, right? What will happen to this after we're not there? We're handing it to someone else to take care of.
Yeah, and so it kind of bleeds into what I was going to ask, which is in all of this, like what's your economic model? How do you make a sustainable business out of being doing this sustainable work?
Yeah, so it's a pay for service. So the landowners are the mining companies wanting to do restoration. It could be big landowner who want to establish a natural reserve, or landowner who bought 1,000 hectares and they want to get into the IQ market in Australia, so the Australian carbon credits. Um, it could be a government as well, looking. So we're doing some work at the moment in the Dentry up in Queensland with reforestation, restoration of degraded landscapes after Cyclone Jasper 2 years ago. So it just depends who is the landowner and what are we doing. We do a lot of monitoring as well with the tech that we have. So especially LiDAR that helps us to map really hard to reach areas. That's when drones are super efficient in that regard. And we do monitoring as well of endangered species. Well, it happens to be an endangered species. For example, we have a project we've been working on in Borneo over the last 2 years where we use our tech to monitor the population of orangutan who live on top of the canopy. So it's easy in a way that those animals are really big and they're easy to spot. And the AI that we run once we get this data has been able through machine learning to be able to make a difference between, oh no, this is a bird, this is an orangutan.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating. I've got a bunch of different questions, so I'm going to probably start with the obvious, easy ones. Well, not actually not that easy, but you talked right before about low tech, so local indigenous knowledge. I didn't get the acronym quite right, but I know that's what we're talking about. Is there an intersection between the monitoring data that you're getting from LiDAR and giving them new data to complement the stuff that they've developed and known over thousands of years? Does this come full circle, that data?
Yeah. And it's good. Look, the perfect example is I'll just give you an example of how some of those tribes live in. I'm more familiar with South America for this particular topic that I'm going to be talking about. But in South America, they put their village in the middle of the forest. And what they do, so they are hunters and gatherer, right? So they are going to every month go in a certain direction, right? And they will rotate around their village in a year, in a year's calendar, right? So in 1 year time, they will have done the perfect circle to because they know there are some specific fruit trees that produce fruit at this particular time of the year, and then they know how far they can go away from their village to actually hunt some animals as well. And the reason why they do this circling strategy is they don't want to be taking out or hunting an animal to until there is none of them in this particular area. So they kind of spread, right, the resources, and that's how they manage things. Now, the land that they use is vast. Like we're talking, thousands, like hundreds of thousands of hectares of land that they own, and that is under their management. So imagine their surprise when they go to a specific part and suddenly it's all the forest has been cut from illegal deforestation, because it is a big issue. Uh, to go back to your initial question, what are the different drivers? We are talking earlier about mining and making room for livestock and growing plants. But you do have in other parts of the world. We don't really have that here in Australia, but you do have that for example, South America. You have that a lot as well in Southeast Asia, with some of the most rare species, that have really high value to make furniture or any other things. And it's heart shattering for them to go there and to just suddenly see there is no trees, right? So what we help them with is we do monitoring. So we set up at this stage, we don't use the land is too vast to use drones. So we go one step above and we use satellites, and we basically monitor. And every day or once a week, we take a picture at exactly the same time of their land. And then we analyze. We have an AI that looks at the picture from last week or yesterday or the 2 weeks ago and the picture of today, and is looking at all the pixels. And as soon as we start seeing a missing pixel, a green pixel, we know a tree is being cut. So we send a message to them, to the chief, to say,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
you have to go to this part of your forest because something is going on, right? So
Wow.
that's how we help as well. So talking about full circle, it's how we can have high tech help sustain this low tech, and vice versa, right? Because they work together.
And that's an example of trying to stop the problem before it's happening or keeps happening. In the context of actually regenerating forest, where you are leveraging indigenous populations to help with that process, it sounded like when you talked about it up front that there are things that, take the example you were using of Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal population, who are doing, the burning that you talk cultural burning. Is that the word you used? I think,
Yeah, cultural.
uh, and that is part of the process that actually helps the regeneration to happen. When you've got a local group who are engaged in helping to regenerate something, I'm guessing that the high tech is also feeding into their actions and activities as well. It's another data point for them beyond the traditional knowledge that they have. Is that correct?
Yeah, but we don't. We're not always flying drones and always doing reforestation. Only
The fun
using
part.
we don't. I mean, I know it's an image that people have. They think we only use the drones reforest, but we don't. So again, an example in the dentry, we're working on a project now where we're going to do that, to have the drones, but also at the same time we're helping the local community to set up a nursery. So we're going to do a mix. So there's different methodology, different techniques that you use when you do reforestation. One of my favorite one is called assisted nucleation, which is also called create. It is forest island. So when you have a bare landscape, you identify areas where you're going to put mini forests that are a little bit more evolved. So you take seedlings that are a bit more evolved, and you fence that against any kind of animals that might decide it's a good idea to go and chew on the seedlings, and you protect that, but you create those mini forests. Um, and then anything that's around it, that's when we do the drone seeding or the drone reforestation. Yeah. So we use a
Yeah.
mix of those. We like to Look, I've always grown things since I was a kid as well. I think this was in my DNA. My mom used to say when I was a kid, I could grow I could grow trees out of chopsticks. So I've got
Was that said in a different language, by the way?
it was yes it
Can
was
you say it in the other language that it would have been said in? I'm going to assume like a French, but I don't know. I don't know what
it
language that
is
is.
French, yes. So so my mom would say elle disait que j'aurais pu planter des arbres avec des baguettes chinoises. There we go.
Sounds heaps better in French. Sounds awesome. You can tell me anything. I've got two questions and they're related. One of them is I want to understand challenges. So you said you've been at this for 7 years, and you talked about some projects that have been ongoing for 2 years. The technology in the world has changed massively in the last 7 years, and so when you started this 7 years ago or thereabouts to now, your the available solutions to how you might solve some of the challenges has changed. So I want to understand two parts specifically. What have been the significant or challenging technical problems, like technology problems, and then what have been the other problems to the thing actually being a successful solution outside of technology over the last few years?
Mm. So if we go back to the main tool that we use, which are drones, every 18 months you have a new drone, right? That so it's version 20 of that drone, which is lighter, flies faster, has more memory, can do more things. So it's really exciting. We always have to be on top of that and to know who does what in the world and keep up with the advancements of the drone technology. Um, but for us, we our focus remains the same, which is improving the tech that is attached to the drone in that regard. When it comes to things that are available to us now that were not available 7 years ago, well, AI is one of them, right? It was a very different conversation 7 years ago, trying to come up with the algorithms that we were developing using Excel sheets um, to help us find the most um, the areas, the pockets of opportunities in the landscape to that are best suited for some sort of species. Whereas today, with the help of AI, it's almost like someone, like you're at the gym and you have a spotter helping you to
Yeah.
when you do the heavy lifting. So it's very exciting. I'm super excited. I'm actually very bullish on this AI technology and the improvement as well that are made when it comes to robots and drones. Um, just because of that, just because we have tools now that enable us to be faster, more precise, and we there is less waste as well, whether it's energy or resources like brain cells. We can spend time doing all those things. So I find that really exciting. Um, yeah. So did I answer?
And
Yeah.
then outside of the technology, I'm trying to understand like what have been the challenges. I mean, you talked about the misconception in the industry is that people think you plant the seeds, you walk away, hey, job done. And so the challenge isn't actually making Lord of the Trees solve the problem or be on the way to solving the problem. Some of these non-technical problems, like or challenges like that you have either overcome or are still trying to overcome. Help me understand maybe the one or two big ones in there.
Yeah. Look, I mean, one of them is we work in a very compliant industry, right? So there's a lot of rules and regulations when you do reforestation. You can't do anything that you want. Um, so I think one of the main challenges is especially when it comes to environmental credits, primarily carbon credits. A lot of good things have happened over the last 20 years, but it's still a very opaque industry, right? You don't know who does what. And I get questions sometimes. There's been a few scandals. I don't want to name any particular companies. It's not very hard to find this information. By the way, it's all public knowledge. There's only 6 companies in the world that do accreditation of carbon credits. Two of them, a couple of years ago, were caught one of them selling biodiversity, sorry, rainforest credits that did absolutely nothing for the rainforest in South America. So more than 90% of their rainforest credits in South America did absolutely nothing. Another one was found 6 months later. 31 of their reforestation projects were found to be on municipality owned land in Brazil, which included schools, stadiums, and tennis courts. Again, this is bad, right? This is just, but it every time you have those events, right, which are systemic in nature, the price of the carbon markets just plummets. And it took for those two major events 6 months for the market to recover. And then the backlash of that, the challenges is you have clients, potential clients that come to us and say, well, are you really planting the trees?
Right.
Are you really doing so? Because you have those stories that come out in the press. So with technology today, and I'm going to take a little pivot here, but w- with the available technology that we have today, including blockchain, we are able to trace, to create that source of truth for anyone that want to check that are the projects genuine, when did you plant the trees, how are they growing, who's taking care of them, and all of that now is going to be made available with literally a click of a button. So when it comes to transparency, which is the next stage of our growth at Lord of the Trees with the work that we do. We want to, yeah, we want to make sure it's all transparent, genuine, and people have a way to check. And it could be anyone. It doesn't have to be a regulator. Anyone will have access to the data and check on the projects that we are working on.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think about like when I think about trust in new ways of doing things or doing something that hasn't really been done properly before, I immediately jump to kind of weirdly maybe in this context, but Airbnb, and they had to establish a really strong level of trust so that someone was happy to have their home open to a stranger, and someone who was a stranger was happy to go into some home and come out alive. And so much of what they had to design into their brand and to their operations and to their, checks and balances and their insurances in their case was to enable trust to exist at really, really high levels because the whole system depends on it. And I think it's probably a microcosm of what you're going to be working through over the coming years. Help me understand, like from here, like what's the road ahead? Like you've been at this for a little while, the technology's changed. It sounds like you've got it to a point where you have something that's ready to scale. Help me understand, like what's in on the road ahead for you guys to make that happen.
Yeah, yeah. So look, we're already scaling. So we're operating now in Australia. Obviously, is our main um, operating ground. We do work in the Pacific, um, especially with Vanuatu. Um, we're opening up South America, so we've done work in Southeast Asia as well. We're opening up South America next year. We have a big project coming up in Colombia, which is really exciting. In terms of what's next, we're just about to launch a new cap raise to help us change gear with the business and really um, invest in those new distributed ledger technology that we're trying to build for that very purpose of adding transparency to the market.
Yeah, and so in scaling, capital drives further investment in the technology to create more trust so that you can get more of this to market. And
Right. Yeah.
trust is and confidence in the solution is some of the barrier. It's not, hey, we need to build better drones or we need to have better monitoring. These kind of planks are okay. It's just how do you make this the most trusted form of forest regeneration so that it's the one that people choose to buy. I've got a related question around economics because I think as much as some of us, probably you and me both on this call, would love for this stuff just to happen because it's the right thing to do, there is always an economic lens through which these things face. Do you foresee a world where the availability of the technology and your knowledge of how to do this and maybe some economies of scale change the price point? I imagine like I go to a fair few festivals, usually quite small scale ones, and a lot of them now, when you go to them, they're like, here's the amount we charge on the ticket because we're going to plant trees while we're at the festival. And I imagine a world where the price point of this becomes suitable that, as going part of the festival, Lord of the Trees comes in and assists with that process. You're probably still involved as a festival goer because that's half the point. Is that kind of where this is going in terms of availability and the economic scale as well?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think as the technology gets better, as everything gets better, economy of scales are here, um, you're able to what you mentioned earlier about vertical farming, right? So we see that as well happening in nursery to a lesser extent than edible plants, but it is starting to happen. So as you start having those economies of scale, you're starting to have the price per seedling in this particular instance go down, but it doesn't remove the fact that also you might get cheaper seedlings. um, Maintaining the landscape is critical for like it's one thing to say okay we're planting trees, but it's how you're going to care for those little baby trees, for those seedlings, for the first 5 to 7 years of their life until they're strong enough to be like okay I'm okay, I don't need you know so I think that's the question is are we going to have economies of scale in the maintenance industry, because we're still it's a very you you rely on people, on human capital enormously, when you do work with the environment.
Mm, yeah,
Much as I would
very.
love, look, don't get me wrong, as much as I would love to have it all automated, it I think we're still a fair way away from that reality. It will happen in the future, but I think
All in
we're
due course.
still a bit, and it's a beautiful,
Wonderful.
it's just I don't know. I mean, I love nature. I love to hear birds. Um, I love to have my hands dirty on the ground. You know what I mean? Like there is this beautiful energy that I find when I do this work. So I don't want it all to be all drones and all looking at a landscape behind a computer screen. It's not
Yeah.
it part of the work that we do, but I find as much, if not more, joy being, barefoot with the Aboriginal people walking through the forest and looking at trees. And, like I love it. That's really that's my thing. So, yeah,
Don't want to get rid of all of that. It's actually a lovely segue to what the closing question I was going to ask, which you probably part of answered. But I wanted to understand what's your favourite thing about working on this problem, and maybe your least favourite thing about working on this problem.
yeah. Well, my favorite thing is that is being on site, um, and getting my feet and hands dirty and meeting those absolutely beautiful people from all around the world and sitting down with them and understand how important those species are, and their connection to nature and the trees and the birds and all of this. I love this. I'm the cup that's never full of this because it's so every time I go to those sites I just get so excited about I'm learning at the same time, which is really exciting. The other thing as well, which I like, is knowing that I'm creating. When we plant trees, we know we have an impact on people and other communities that I will never meet ever in my life. Right. So it's that knowing that okay, I've done something. I'm leaving something behind that is for good. Yeah. So that's a good thing. The thing I that I find frustrating are, I think, uh, maybe deadlines sometimes, and working with you know there are regulations and having to do things a certain way, which sometimes just doesn't work. Um, is I find a bit frustrating. So yeah, it just depends what it just depends where we are. I have to give you an example here just so you understand. But
Sure.
we were working on a project in India, and a part of us getting funding for this particular project, we had to ensure that the communities that we were working with uh, didn't do anything when it comes to slavery and exploitation of children. And in this particular region, um, it's not men, but it's women that we work with, right? So women are the community that so we actually we deal with the men, but the women are the ones that are helping us on the ground, that are taking us through the forest, that explain the species that are important to them, and they carry with them their kids on their back, or if they have little kids that are up to 7 years with us, right? And what happens, and it has happened for hundreds of years, where the little kids, that's how they learn about the forest and the plants. So in the process, they were going to be involved as well to help us collect seeds, because that's the only way they learn. And because of that rule, or because of that way, the regulations say, okay, no child slavery. They saw the involvement of those kids to be part of child slavery
Exploitation, right?
and exercise exploitation. So the project didn't go ahead. We could not get the funding just because we tried to argue, but it was so frustrating. It was the rules out there, and there was no way to wiggle, and so we didn't get funding for this project. So that would be my frustration.
Yes, it's a problem where you have someone in an ivory tower somewhere who doesn't understand the conditions on the ground
Mm.
and one size fits all rule. Aymeric, a wonderful arc of a story here today. I always think we're going to go for 40 minutes. We always get closer to an hour, which tells sign of a great interview. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, and really looking forward to seeing where you guys go from here. And exciting to see some of these drones in action and get on the ground at some point too. So thank you, and all the best with Lord of the Trees. I wanted to get that in one more time.
Thanks, Vincent. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, everyone.